Hi everybody, Parker here. Today we're going to be talking about chess notation. We're going to do a quick review if you're unfamiliar with it. If you are, we are going to do a quick self-assessment quiz towards the end. You should be able to find the chapters in the video below. So we're just going to jump right into it. All right, I've got a chessboard set up, and then you guys should also see over here is my notation cheat sheet. This is a little screenshot from what's actually on the tournament scorecards. So you will have access to this during the tournament. And this is really just to help take some of the pressure off that we want you to be familiar with chess notation, but you don't have to be, you don't have to be a total expert on this. You'll have some help, you'll have some reminders. So hopefully this will, hopefully this will cover the basics, and then also, as you'll notice down here with some of the more examples and some of the special cases above that, hopefully we're going to be able to kind of cover any of the weird scenarios that might come up in your game. So let's jump right in. We're going to get down to it. So we start with all of our pieces. Now, the squares as well, the squares are what we care about first and foremost. So we care about when a piece moves, we need a way to tell which of the 64 squares on a chessboard that piece is moving to. So we've labeled them A through H. You guys should know that. And then 1 through 8. So each square has coordinates, right? So this square right here is going to be G. If I move that knight, you can see G3. This square here is going to be D4. We've got E5. Whoops. We've got E8, right? So each square has a coordinate. Now, we're going to use those coordinates in conjunction with the pieces of the chessboard, and that's how we're going to tell what happens in a game. So starting with the kings, the king gets the letter K. So if I move my king to this square, which you guys know couldn't really happen, the king can't jump over and the king can't move more than one square, but just pretend with me for a second. If the king moves to this square, we would write that as K E4. So K meaning the king, this is the piece that we care about, and the square is E4. KE4. That's how we would write that move down. Okay. Now let's pretend that we're talking about our queens. Queen gets the letter Q, as you guys can see in that cheat sheet. Let's say black moves their queen here. Again, we're just pretending. This square is G5. So we would say QG5. That's how we would write that move down. Okay. Good. The king and queen are pretty easy. The bishops should also be pretty easy. We've got 4 bishops, 2 for each team. The bishop gets the letter B. Makes a lot of sense. Bishops come out. Bishop comes to this square. This is going to be bishop C4. BC4 is how we would write that. Okay. Perfect. All right. The knights are our next pieces that we're going to talk about. The knights are a little bit weird, because normally when we spell the word knight, it's K-N-I-G-H-T. However, you guys will probably remember that K has already been claimed by the king. And since the king is a bit more important than the knight, we're going to let the king keep the letter K. I don't make the rules. It's just how it is. So knight is going to get the letter N because it sounds like knight. So just don't get confused. Don't accidentally put K for your knight. Remember, K is for the king only. All right. So if I made this move here, this would be knight to, sorry, I got to move that bishop so you guys can see, F3. So this one would be written as NF3, knight F3. Okay, maybe black responds with knight C6, NC6, right? And I promise these letters will be a lot easier to see. Whoops. Bishop takes its own queen. That was weird. These letters will be a lot easier to see on a tournament chessboard. You guys have hopefully seen those in class. Sorry if they're a little hard to see on the chess.com screen. So maybe black responds then with knight c6, and then white could play knight c3, and maybe black plays knight f6. Okay? All of those would be written as N, and then whatever square the knight moved to. Perfect. And finally, we have our rooks. The rook gets the letter R. We're back to normal on this one. So here we would say rook c4, and then rook c5, and then rook h5. All right? Perfect. Okay, and then finally we're on to the last bit of the army, which is going to be the pawns. Now, there's a lot of pawns, and so we actually don't use a letter for the pawns. The pawns are just going to be represented by whatever square they move to. So if white, excuse me, that was weird. If white makes this first move, we're just going to write E4. We don't have to put any letter in front of it. So we would say white's first move is E4. Black's first move is E5. Okay? And this is going to go for all the pawns. So then maybe after knight F3, black plays NF6, and now white plays D4. Okay, so we've talked about how to notate all of the pieces and the squares that they move to. If you have questions on that, please feel free to go back and review the video on that one. Watch it as many times as you need. Because now we're going to talk about some of the special cases. So what happens if black's next move is to capture this pawn here? How do we notate captures? We're going to use an X. I think this one makes a lot of sense because we're saying X, that player or that piece is off the board. Okay? So let's look at where that piece came from. It was right here. The pawn was right there. So this is the only time when we care about the square that the piece started on. I know earlier I said we don't really care about the square that the piece starts on. We just care about the square that the piece finishes on. Well, with pawns, we do kind of have to care about where it's starting. So for black, this is black's pawn that is on the E file, right? It's on this row. So we're going to say, in this moment when black goes here, we start by saying E, as in the pawn that was on the E file, takes, so we're going to have an X, EX, and then now we finish with the square that we're on, which is D4. So this move right here, from there to there, is going to be written as EXD4. In other words, if we were to kind of expand that out, it might sound like if you were describing this to a person, and not just writing it down on paper, you might say E pawn takes D4, right? So the X always goes in between the piece and the square that it's taking. That's a very important piece to remember there, is the order that you write things in. So normally if a piece is just moving, we're just going to say piece and then square. Now when there's a capture involved, we need to say this piece takes that square. So we use the X for that. Hopefully that makes sense. So black makes this move. Now let's get some more practice with captures. White wasn't happy about losing their pawn, so they're going to take back with the knight. So now we're going to say knight takes D4. So we would write that as NXD4, right? Excellent. Now, interestingly, if black recaptures here, what piece is this? This is our knight, so we're going to say NX, because there was a capture, so knight takes, and it's the same square, D4. So interestingly, both players just made the same move, NXD4 followed by NXD4. Kind of fun. And it will be easy to tell who is who, because as we record games with an actual score sheet, there will be a section for white and a section for black. So it'll be easy to see, which color is making which move. And then to finish out this sequence, white is going to play queen takes D4, which would be written as QXD4. Okay, good. So remember, the only time that we care about the starting square was with the pawns, right? When these pawns were here, the only time we cared about that was with the pawns, because we have to clarify which pawn, because there's so many of them. So here we would say E takes D4, right? The pawn that was on the E file here takes the D4 square. Okay? That's captures. So then let's say after queen takes d4, again, we're playing on. Maybe black plays knight f6. White plays bishop c4. Black plays, let's go with bishop b4. Now, this one is important because this is a check. The bishop is checking the black bishop is checking the white king. So at the end of this, because we would just say bishop b4, but we have to include the check. So check, the symbol for check is a little plus sign. So we would say b4 plus, meaning bishop b4 check. All right. So from here, white now has to do something to respond to that check. So let's say they, that was not right. The bishop is there. Let's say they respond with the knight. And then we get knight c3. Okay. Perfect. Now, black is going to, excuse me. Oh, the computer thinks it's white's turn to move. I put that in wrong. Well, just pretend, okay. Undo that. Pretend white goes here. Okay, wonderful. All right, now let's say it's black to move. So this is our castle now. Black is going to castle. White is going to castle. Why can't white castle? What? That's being weird. It must not like how I set up the position. Weird computer glitch. Okay, ignore that. Black castles. That's all that matters. As long as one side can castle, we're happy. Okay, so black castles. So on the cheat sheet, you guys should see how we write castling. Now, if you guys remember, there are two different ways that we can castle. We can castle kingside, or we can castle queenside, right? So let's see. White still can't castle? Man, it must really not like something that I did in setting this position up. Well, let's pretend that white can castle, and white's king would end up on c1, and the rook would end up on d1. So we can castle kingside, or castling short, or we can castle queenside. Either one is allowed. Black only had the option to castle kingside because of all the other pieces in the way on the queen side. But either one is okay, and there's a different way that we notate both of them. So castling short or castling kingside, we notate as O-O, and that means castles. All right, you guys should see that one on the cheat sheet there. Similarly, if we play a long castle or a castle on the queen side, that would look like this, if it would work, we would notate that as O-O-O. So 3 O's for long castle, 2 O's for short castle. Okay. Excellent. So there's our castling. Everybody's good with that. And then finally, the only one, and I'm not going to be able to get it into a position, but really the only other main special case that you guys should focus on, sorry, there are 2 more. So the first one is checkmate. Checkmate is going to be, it's going to look very similar to how we had the check. So remember with our bishop check, we had bishop b4 check, which was written as b4 plus. So similarly, let's pretend that bishop b4 was checkmate. We would say b4, and then we kind of use the hashtag sign. That means checkmate. So same format as check, but we would say b4 hashtag checkmate. Okay. The other one, let me get back to this one. The other one that I think is important to know is when there are multiple pieces that can go to the same square. So for example, each team has 2 knights, right? Sometimes these knights might go to the same square. Here's an example of this. Let's say white plays here, black goes there, excuse me, and then white, and then black. Now, white could put this knight here. Now you'll notice either knight could go to that square, to the E2 square, right? So we have to specify which knight is moving to that E2 square. Okay, so in this case, the best way to do that, we have a knight that's on the C file, which is this one, and we have a knight that's on the G file, which is this one. Well, since this is the one moving, the one on the G file, we're going to say knight G to E2, which we would write as NG E2. Okay, so this one gets a little bit weird, and this one can definitely be confusing if you're not used to it. So don't feel bad if this one takes a second or if it takes a little bit of practice. It's a totally normal one. Okay, so knight G E2. It's a mouthful. I get it. Now black can actually do the same thing here. So let's get some more practice. Let's say black wants to move to this square. So they're going to go knight G, because it's also the one on the G file. Knight G to E7. So we would write that as NG E7, right? Very good. Okay, those are really the only special cases that I have for you guys. So with that, I think we're going to jump into a quick assessment. Okay? Now, pay attention to the special cases that we have going on here. All right, so the first one is going to be that we can have both a capture and a check in the same move. That first example says queen takes E5 check. Right? If we break that down, Q, X, E5 plus. So we know Q is queen, X means takes or captures, E5 is the square we're talking about, and check. Right? Check and checkmate are always put at the end. Oh, and I just realized, I'm sorry, I forgot one of the other key special cases, and that was promotion. So as you guys know, when a pawn gets to the other side of the board, sorry, we're going to backtrack for a second. So when a pawn gets to the other side of the board, let's say we've got a king here, and a king here, and a pawn here, and it's time to play, it's white to move. If white moves this pawn, so this is the pawn on the D file, right? So D, and now it's going to get to the square D8. So we're just going to play, so we would say D8, right, normally, because that's how the pawn moves. The pawn doesn't get a letter, so we just say the pawn moves to D8, and we write that by just saying D8. And then we're going to use an equals sign. This is how we notate promotion. So D8 equals Q. And that makes sense, because if you think of it just kind of like a math equation, we're saying the pawn now equals a queen, right? Or whatever piece. Typically it's a queen. Sometimes it could be a knight or a rook, but most of the time it's going to be a queen. So D8 equals Q. That's how we get that one. Sorry about that. I completely forgot. I was looking at my other screen and I forgot to check my own notation sheet. So D8 equals Q. All right. Okay, so back to these special examples, the more examples section at the bottom. So we have queen takes E5 with check. We talked about that one. Rook B E8. Okay, so this is very similar to the one that we just talked about. And I like going through and just talking about these because I want it to, notation can look weird, but it's kind of like a little language. When you say it out loud, right, RBE8 doesn't really mean anything. But when you say it, when you kind of say the full thing like a sentence, rook on B file to E8, it makes a little bit more sense, right? And then you can start to understand and kind of visualize what the heck that actually means. So the next example is E6 checkmate. So keep in mind, checkmate could be delivered with any piece, and that includes a pawn. So in this case, since we're talking about a pawn, there's no letter in front of it. So it's just the pawn that's on the E file moves to E6 and checkmates the opponent king. All right. The next one, we just looked at an example like this. In this case, we're saying B1 equals queen. So the pawn moves to B1 and it promotes to a queen. All right. Now, we talked a little bit about this one in our example earlier of the pawn, when a pawn takes a pawn. So the next one, we have GXF5. Again, kind of sounds like a mouthful, but in this case, we're saying the pawn on the G file takes F5. Okay, and it doesn't matter it doesn't matter what piece is on F5. All we care about is that the pawn on the G file takes the piece that was sitting on F5. Okay, so G takes F5, GX F5. Perfect. Our next one, this one is really similar. So this is a slightly different example of the multiple pieces example that we gave earlier. So like when two knights could move to the same square or two rooks could move to the same square. So earlier we said rook b e8, right? Well, now what if the rooks were stacked vertically? Let me kind of show you what I mean by this one. Let's pretend, what if white has rooks like this? Okay. And so now, well, let's say white moves their rook to that square. Either rook could have moved to this square, right? If we go back, either rook can go to this square. So in this case, we have to specify which one is going. But you'll notice they're both on the C file. So the only way that we can distinguish them now is by looking at which rank they're on. Okay, so in this case, this is the rook. This would be R5, and this would be R2. Like R2D2. Ha ha ha. I'm sure some of you thought that before I even said it. So R2 or R5. So in this case, we moved R5, C4. Wow. It's a lot. It's a lot. I know you guys got that one, though. You guys are pros. So that was kind of the other example, is that sometimes we prefer to use the letters if we can, but if pieces are stacked vertically, we are happy to use the numbers as well. Okay, so that's what this example is giving down here. The R1 E4, that just means the rook on the first file moves to the E4 square. Okay, and again, we only have to do this if there are multiple rooks or knights or whatever the piece is. It's really only going to be rooks or knights. Or I guess if you have a second queen, it could be a second queen. But it's really only going to be those pieces. But we have to specify which one. So it's only if there's multiple. Otherwise, don't worry about it. Just write it like normal. Just write rook f8 or whatever the example is. Okay? Good. Okay, our second to last special example is O-O-O plus. So you guys should remember that 3 O's means queenside castle or long castle. Don't forget that sometimes this could happen with check. I'll show you really quick. This one's kind of interesting. Whoops, didn't mean to flip the board. Let's reset the board. So let's say white plays here, black here. We play a nice, happy little game. And we're going. And we go. And then D takes E4. Followed by D takes E4. Let's say queen takes right here. King has to take. And then we play some chess. And it's awesome. And then we go here and here. And I know these are bad moves. It's just an example. Then we go here. And then we go here. And now we go black plays queenside castle. And you'll notice that the white king, is now in check. So this is a perfect example of O-O-O plus. Queenside castle, check. It's really interesting. You can castle, and that can sometimes result in your opponent being in check. In very special and very awesome occasions, it could also be checkmate. So we could say queenside castle, checkmate. If you ever get that in a real game, you better reach out and tell me, because that's the coolest thing ever, and I've never seen that, and it would be awesome to see that in real life. Okay. Our final example is going to be E8 equals Q, checkmate. So we're saying a pawn moves to E8, becomes a queen, because that's how promotion works, and that move results in checkmate. Okay. That was a lot. Keep in mind, you guys are going to have this notation sheet with you. You're going to have all these examples that we just went through. Hopefully these special examples help you guys to remember kind of some of the nuance and some of the weird cases that you might encounter. Let's do a quick quiz. They're going to start relatively easy and get harder. Hopefully you guys can get all or almost all of these. If not, I would recommend going back and watching a little bit more and doing some practice on your own. Okay, our first quiz is going to be here. So what I want you guys to do, this is not the move, sorry. I'll play the next move in a second. What I would like you guys to do for the quiz, grab a pencil and a paper or make a note on your phone, just some way for you to write down the move before it actually, before I give you the answer. I want you guys to write it down as to what you think it is, and then check. If you're right, awesome. If you're wrong, go back and kind of circle that one so that you can go back later and review whatever the topic was that you maybe missed on that one. Okay? So I'll give you a second. Go ahead and pause the video, grab a pencil and a paper, and then come back. Okay. So here's the move. Black plays what? So hopefully you guys recognize that this one is D5. It's a pawn, no letter necessary for the piece, so we're just going to say D5. Okay, I'm going to give you guys about 5 seconds to try and write these moves down, and the reason for that is the time control that we're playing with. You guys are going to have 5 bonus seconds, 5 seconds of delay, which means that you have 5 seconds. When your opponent hits the clock and passes it to your turn, you'll have 5 seconds before your time actually starts. That 5 seconds is meant to be for you to write this down. So I want you guys, ideally, to be able to write moves down in about 5 seconds or less so that you can have all the full time to focus on what your move is going to be. And that's just a rough, I understand there's going to be some weird ones where it may take you a little bit longer than 5 seconds, but as a general rule, we want to try and get you guys quick enough to be able to write down in about 5 seconds. So, D5. All right, next example. We're in this position and white plays what? That was white's move. Whoops, moving to here. This is BA4, bishop A4. Good. Okay, we're here, and black plays this. One more time. So this one is going to be KXC5. King takes C5, right? Hopefully you got the X in there for the captures. Okay, don't forget. That one's very important if we're capturing a piece. You have to include that. KX C5. King takes C5. Perfect. Our next one is going to be white to play, and white plays here. So this one is going to be RX D3 plus. So hopefully you guys were able to catch that. So rook takes D3, right? Because there was a pawn there, the rook captures it. So RX D3, this is also check to the black king. So we have to include the check in there. RX D3 plus. Okay, that one might have been a little tricky. Don't forget to pay attention to all the pieces. Always look for checks as well. Okay, our next one is here. White to play, and white plays kingside castle. How do we write kingside castle? Good. This one's going to be O-O. If you forgot this one, check on the cheat sheet. That one is right on there, and that one should hopefully be pretty easy to remember. Okay, good. Kingside castle. Our next example is here. White to play, and the screen gave it away a little bit. It is checkmate. So, but what's the proper way to notate that? Go ahead and write that one down. Perfect. So this is rook h8 checkmate. rh8 hashtag. That's how we're going to write that. Perfect. Okay. Next example is going to be white to play, and white plays this. So we go here to here. h8 equals q. So h8 promotes to a queen. Right? That's how we say that in normal person speak. Fantastic. All right, we are here. We kind of just went over an example similar to this, but the move that white plays now is this. So this is knight g e2. Hopefully you can remember this one because we actually went over this exact example of doubling the knights up, or of two knights being able to move to the e2 square. But remember, yep, knight that starts on the g file moves to e2. Okay? Awesome, awesome. Next one is going to be, I believe it's white to play now. Excuse me, it's black to play. Black's move is this. So this one is going to be C1 equals Q plus. So let's walk through this one. The queen moving to C1 and the pawn moving to C1 that becomes a queen. So C1 equals Q. That should be clear, but you guys might have either forgotten about check or checkmate and just left it at that. But remember, the queen now sees the king. Now some of you might be wondering, why isn't this checkmate? The king can't escape. And you are correct about that. The king has no safe squares. However, white can now bring their bishop back and block the king. So that's why it's check and not checkmate. It's a very important distinction on that one, all right? Make sure, before you write checkmate or before you tell your opponent checkmate, you really want to make sure that everything is covered on your end. It's always pretty embarrassing when you say checkmate and they say, no, watch this, and then you kind of go, whoops, that was, it's just a little bit weird. So do your best to make sure that all of your bases are covered and that you know for sure that it's checkmate. Otherwise, it's just going to be check. So this one would be C1 equals Q plus. Pawn moves to C1, becomes a queen, and checks the enemy king. Okay, that one was tough. That one was a bit tricky. And that one was intentional. Again, most of your moves, most of the time when you're recording a game, it's going to be pretty normal stuff, but every once in a while you are going to get into some of these weird cases and you need to understand how to notate them properly. So here's our last one right here. It's white to play, and white is going to make the move there. Okay, now there's multiple ways that white could have won here, but the move that I chose specifically because we talked about this one earlier and I mentioned it briefly. We have two queens, right? Two queens that can go to some of the same squares. So we have to clarify which queen are we talking about. So the square that it moves to, right? That one's B8. So we're going to say Q, and it was the queen that was on the A file originally. So Q, A, B8, checkmate. Right? The king has nowhere safe to go. And this one did kind of spoil it because it says checkmate. But we're going to write that as Q, A, B8, hashtag. Okay, that's a lot. Those are the 10 examples that I have for you guys. Hopefully you could get, I'm hoping that you were able to get about 8 or more of those right. If not, I would recommend trying it again. Trying to freshen up your skills a little bit on those ones. And I understand. I did throw some hard ones at you guys on purpose because I want you guys to be ready for whatever kind of crazy awesome chess moves come your way in the future. If you are feeling like you need a bit more practice, totally understand that. One resource that I would recommend is going to be Chess Kids. I know some of you may be familiar with this, and this one's great, or any, just in general, any chess analysis site. So chess.com has it, Lichess. Lichess is a little bit harder in my opinion. I would recommend either chess.com or ChessKid, depending on kind of what you're comfortable with. But you can come to learn. Let's see. Oh, excuse me, I missed it. If you come here just on the home screen, and I clicked on the wrong part, but you come to this Learn drop down, and then down here there's a section that says Analysis Board. This is going to be really great practice because you can just make moves. You can just move your pieces, and it will help auto-notate over here for you. So you'll notice this is our first move, d4, and then maybe black plays d5. White plays bishop f4, bf4, right? So this is some good practice of just kind of being able to play around, get a bit more familiar with it, get you the practice that you need so that you can feel comfortable with that. It's a great way as well to kind of check and say, I think I did this game right. Let me put it into ChessKit or any analysis board and make sure that I actually did it right. Another great way to practice, if you have a parent or an older sibling or a friend or somebody that knows how to play chess, play a game with them. Get a piece of paper, or you can download my my chess score sheet. It should be on the FAQ page on the school district's website for the chess tournament. You can download that and you can use that to practice and just play a game of chess with somebody and notate the game. You do it for both players, right? So keep in mind, when you're notating a chess game, you write down your move and your opponent's move. You write down the move for white and for black. But so you can play a game with somebody else and just get some practice. That would be a great way to do it. It does take a little bit longer, so just be prepared for the fact that you'll spend a little more time doing that, but a little bit of chess never hurt anybody. So I can highly recommend that as another great way to practice and solidify your skills. If you guys have any questions, check out the video. Hopefully I was able to cover everything in this video, so feel free to go back, rewind, and then if you're watching this before classes end, feel free to ask me questions before we wrap things up. But other than that, I think that's all I have for you guys today. So great job, and be looking forward to seeing you soon.